The night my wife looked me in the eye and said, "I'm only here for the money," I didn't argue. I just laughed. She thought she was clever, using love like a business deal, planning to take half my company and walk away smiling. But what she didn't know was that I'd already planned my revenge. So when her own voice played in court saying those exact words, "I'm just here for the money," her smile vanished forever. And in the end, I didn't destroy her with hate. I destroyed her with forgiveness. Subscribe, like, comment and watch till the ending to share this interesting story to family and friends. The morning light spilled through the wide windows of the Cole residence, highlighting the perfection Lydia had carefully curated: white marble counters, gold-trimmed frames, and an arrangement of lilies that looked more like a showroom display than a family home. From the outside, everything was perfect. Inside, something invisible was dying. Ethan Cole adjusted his tie in the mirror, eyes weary but kind. A self-made man, once a mechanic, now the owner of a fast-growing auto parts company. To him, success wasn't about luxury, it was about stability, the kind he'd never had growing up. But Lydia didn't see it that way anymore. "Are you wearing that again?" she asked, glancing up from her phone at the breakfast table. Her voice was calm, but her eyes carried irritation disguised as concern. "You're meeting investors today, Ethan. At least look like you own the company." He forced a smile. "They're coming to see my work, not my wardrobe." Lydia scoffed, stirring her coffee. "You'll never understand status, will you?" Ethan didn't reply. He looked at their son, Adam, who sat quietly munching his toast, pretending not to notice the tension. "You ready for school, buddy?" he asked softly. Adam nodded, eyes flicking between his parents. "Yeah, Dad." After Lydia dropped Adam off, Ethan drove to work in his old SUV, a car he'd kept since the early days. To him, it was sentimental. To Lydia, it was embarrassing. He pushed the thought away and dove into meetings, numbers and plans, the world where logic ruled, not emotion. Yet even as his business grew, his home felt smaller every day. When he returned that evening, Lydia was dressed elegantly, ready to go out. "Dinner with the girls?" she said, not meeting his eyes. "Don't wait up." Ethan's smile faltered. "You've been going out a lot lately." She stopped, turned slightly and gave a cool smile. "Would you rather I sit here waiting for you to come home smelling like engine oil?" The words stung. He wanted to respond, but silence seemed safer. When she left, he stood alone in the doorway, the echo of her heels fading into the night. The house was quiet, too quiet. He reheated leftovers and sat at the table alone, staring at the empty chair across from him. For a moment he remembered when Lydia used to sit there barefoot, laughing at his corny jokes, when love was easy and broke didn't feel like failure. Later he tucked Adam into bed. "Dad," the boy whispered sleepily, "why doesn't Mom smile at you anymore?" Ethan brushed a hand through his son's hair and smiled faintly. "She's just tired, kiddo. Grown-ups get tired sometimes." But as he turned off the light and stepped into the hallway, his smile faded. Deep down he knew tired wasn't the right word. Something else was happening, something darker. And though he didn't know it yet, the first cracks of betrayal had already begun to show. The night came quiet and heavy, broken only by the soft hum of Ethan's laptop. He sat alone in his office, finishing invoices long after everyone else had gone to bed. The glow of the desk lamp cut through the dark, highlighting tired eyes that had forgotten what peace felt like. It was almost midnight when he heard Lydia's laughter, sharp and unfamiliar, drifting from the patio. At first he smiled faintly, glad to hear her laugh again. But something about it, too flirtatious, too free, made him pause. He stood and walked toward the living room. The patio door was slightly ajar, the cool night air carrying her voice inside. "Oh, come on," she was saying, her tone playful, dripping with sweetness. Then a pause, followed by words that turned Ethan's blood cold. "You know I'm only here for the money, right? Once I get what's mine, I'm gone." For a moment Ethan couldn't breathe. His heart hammered against his ribs as he froze behind the curtain, unable to move or speak. He told himself he'd misheard, that she was joking. But then she laughed again, light and careless. "He's too soft. Too loyal. He'll never see it coming." Ethan's hand clenched into a fist, trembling. His world tilted. Every late night, every sacrifice, every "I love you," echoed back as a lie. He leaned against the wall, chest tight, fighting the wave of disbelief that threatened to crush him. The man's voice on the phone was faint but familiar. Ethan strained to listen, recognizing it. Ryan Blake, his old college friend, someone he had trusted enough to invest in his company. Betrayal doubled, cutting deeper. He wanted to burst out there, confront her, scream, demand why. But something inside him, Something calm, dangerous, and cold told him to wait. He pulled his phone from his pocket, thumb shaking slightly, and pressed record. Lydia's voice came through, sweet and poisonous. "Once the divorce is final, I'll get half of everything. Then maybe I'll finally start living." When the call ended, she walked back inside, humming softly, unaware that the walls had just witnessed her confession. She brushed past Ethan in the hallway, phone still in hand, and smiled faintly. "You're still up? You should rest," she said. Ethan managed a nod. "Yeah, I will." As she disappeared up the stairs, he sank into a chair, heart heavy but mind clear. He replayed the recording once, just once, to make sure he wasn't dreaming. The words stung like acid. But strangely, he didn't cry. He didn't rage. He just smiled. Not the smile of a man broken, but the faint, knowing smile of one who had just found his weapon. He whispered to himself, voice low and measured. "You're here for the money, Lydia? Let's make sure that's all you ever get." The night air turned cold, but Ethan felt something ignite within him, a quiet, calculating resolve. The game had changed. He wouldn't warn her. He wouldn't fight her. He would let her walk right into the trap she built herself. The morning after Lydia's phone call felt strangely ordinary. The house smelled of coffee and buttered toast. Sunlight danced on the kitchen tiles. To anyone else it was a normal day, but to Ethan, everything had changed. He sat at the dining table reading the news on his tablet, pretending to be the same husband she thought she knew. Lydia walked in wearing a silk robe, scrolling through her phone, her tone casual. "Morning," she said, not looking up. "Morning," Ethan replied, voice calm, steady. She poured herself coffee, humming lightly, unaware that her every movement now felt rehearsed to him. He studied her with a kind of quiet detachment, no longer as a man in love, but as a man studying his opponent. When she left to meet a friend, Ethan went to his office and made his first call, to Mark Jefferson, his lawyer and old confidant. "Mark," Ethan said evenly, "I need to make some adjustments to my estate." Discreetly. Mark hesitated. "Everything all right?" Ethan forced a smile into his voice. "Everything's perfect. Just want to make sure my son's future is protected." Over the next few days, Ethan quietly built a fortress around his finances. He transferred business ownership to a holding company under Adam's trust, revised his will, and created legal safeguards Lydia could never touch. Each signature, each sealed envelope became a step closer to freedom. He played the part of the loving husband flawlessly, bringing her flowers, taking her to dinner, smiling through conversations that once would have hurt him. Lydia, convinced she was winning, grew more careless. She spent more, laughed louder, and bragged to friends about the big change coming. One afternoon, Ethan overheard her on the phone again, this time with Ryan. "Just a few more weeks," she whispered. "Once the divorce goes through, I'll be rich." Ethan closed his office door softly, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. He wasn't the kind of man who shouted or broke things. His revenge would be quiet, legal, and absolute. That night, over dinner, Lydia brought up a topic she'd been dancing around for weeks. "Ethan," she began carefully, "don't you think we've grown apart? Maybe we both deserve different things now." He looked up from his plate, expression unreadable. "You might be right." Surprised by his calmness, she smiled, mistaking his composure for surrender. "I'm glad you see it that way," she said. "It'll be easier this way, for both of us." Ethan nodded, sipping his wine. Inside he felt no sadness, no anger, just clarity. He wasn't losing her. He was releasing her to her own undoing. As she spoke about new beginnings, Ethan's gaze lingered on her, emotionless. If only she knew that every word she said was tightening the noose she'd tied for herself. That night, when Lydia slept, Ethan sat alone in his study, finalizing documents under the faint light of his desk lamp. The last paper he signed was a transfer of assets, everything to Adam's trust. He leaned back in his chair, exhaled slowly, and whispered, "You want freedom, Lydia? I'll make sure it's the kind money can't buy." It was a Friday afternoon when the storm finally arrived. Ethan had just wrapped up a board meeting when his assistant walked in, holding a thick envelope. "Sir, this was delivered by a courier," she said, eyes uncertain. He thanked her, already knowing what it was. He didn't need to open it to recognize the weight of betrayal. Inside lay divorce papers, neat, cold, impersonal. The reason typed in bold, irreconcilable differences. Ethan let out a slow breath, his face unreadable. So it was time. When he got home, Lydia was waiting in the living room, perfectly composed in a cream blouse and diamond earrings. Her smile was polite, confident, almost rehearsed. I assume you got them, she said. Ethan nodded, placing the envelope on the table between them. I did. Her tone was smooth, her eyes steady. This doesn't have to be messy, Ethan. I think we both know things haven't been working. Let's just do this peacefully. He studied her, silent for a long moment. Peacefully? He repeated softly. She shrugged lightly. You're successful. I deserve my share. After all, I stood by you through the hard years. Ethan leaned back, arms crossed. Your share? Yes, she said quickly, sensing resistance. Half of everything. The house, the cars, the business assets. That's only fair. He wanted to laugh at the irony, the woman who once said love was priceless now reducing everything to numbers and possessions. But he didn't laugh. Not yet. Instead, he said calmly, if that's what you believe is fair, then we'll let the court decide. Her expression flickered for just a second. She hadn't expected cooperation, only submission. Good, she said, standing. I'll have my lawyer reach out. Over the next few weeks, Lydia played her part flawlessly. She hosted friends, told them she was finally taking control of her life, and even hinted that Ethan had been neglectful. She believed victory was inevitable. Ryan, her secret lover, fed her false confidence, whispering promises of new beginnings and shared wealth. Together, they imagined a future built on Ethan's money. Meanwhile, Ethan remained composed, attending court sessions quietly, answering questions with precision. His lawyer, Mark Jefferson, handled the rest. Lydia misread his calm as defeat, not realizing every move she made was already predicted. On the day of the hearing, Lydia arrived radiant, dressed as if attending a gala. Ethan, in contrast, wore a simple navy suit. When she glanced at him across the courtroom, she saw a man who looked oddly at peace. Her lawyer began with practiced arrogance, outlining her demands in detail. Ethan said nothing. Then, when it was his turn, Mark stood and spoke firmly. Your Honor, before proceeding further, we'd like to submit Exhibit A, a recorded statement from Mrs. Cole herself. Lydia's confidence faltered for the first time. Her head snapped toward Ethan, eyes wide. What recording? She whispered. Ethan didn't answer. He just looked at her, calm, unflinching. The judge pressed play. And Lydia's own voice filled the courtroom. I'm only here for the money. Once I get what's mine, I'm gone. The silence that followed was absolute. The courtroom fell into an uneasy silence. The only sound was the faint crackle of the audio recording playing Lydia's voice, sharp, smug, undeniable. You know I'm only here for the money, right? Once I get what's mine, I'm gone. Each word echoed off the marble walls, and Lydia's confident smile melted away. Her lawyer's pen slipped from his hand. Murmurs rippled through the spectators' seats. Ethan sat still, his face expressionless, his eyes steady on her. For months, he had replayed this moment in his mind, imagining rage, satisfaction, or relief. But all he felt now was calm inevitability. The judge leaned forward, brows knitted. Mrs. Cole, is this your voice? Lydia's throat tightened. That was taken out of context, she stammered. Ethan's lawyer, Mark Jefferson, rose smoothly. Your Honor, the recording was legally obtained from a phone call made in Mr. Cole's home. We also have accompanying financial records showing Mrs. Cole's undisclosed transactions and communications with one Ryan Blake, a business associate of Mr. Cole. The name dropped like a bomb. Lydia's eyes went wide. Ryan? That's irrelevant. On the contrary, Mark continued, sliding a file across the table. These documents prove collusion between Mrs. Cole and Mr. Blake to manipulate financial outcomes in anticipation of divorce proceedings. Ryan, sitting quietly in the back row, turned pale. He hadn't expected Ethan to know his name, let alone have evidence. Lydia turned toward him, silently begging for help, but he avoided her gaze. The judge sighed, closing the folder after a few tense minutes of review. Mrs. Cole, he said sternly, this court does not look kindly upon manipulation, deceit, or fraud, especially when it involves premeditated financial exploitation. Lydia's eyes brimmed with tears. Her voice broke. I didn't mean for it to go this far. But the damage was done. The judge's decision was swift and final. The court rules in favor of Mr. Cole. Mrs. Cole forfeits any claim to business assets, properties, and financial holdings. The prenuptial clauses and trust documents stand. Custody of the minor child, Adam Cole, remains with Mr. Cole. Case closed. The gavel struck and it was over. Lydia sat frozen, her face pale, makeup streaked with tears. The courtroom emptied around her, whispers following her like shadows. Ryan stood, slipped quietly out the back door and didn't look back. Ethan remained seated for a moment longer, breathing deeply. There was no triumph in his heart, just release. He finally turned to Lydia, his voice calm, almost gentle. You once said you were here for the money. I made sure that's all you ever got. She looked up at him, trembling, but he was already walking away. No anger. No words left to say. Outside the courthouse, sunlight hit his face. The air felt cleaner, lighter, like a burden had finally lifted. Mark joined him at the steps. You handled that with grace, Ethan? He smiled faintly. Grace wasn't for her. It was for me. As they walked to the car, Ethan glanced once more at the courthouse doors. Lydia stood there, small, broken, watching him drive away, a queen who had gambled her kingdom and lost it all. 2 weeks after the court ruling, Lydia's world had crumbled into dust. Her once lavish apartment, rented under Ryan's name, was empty now. He'd vanished the morning after the trial, taking whatever money she had left in her hidden account. When she called his number, it went straight to voicemail. When she tried again, she found it disconnected. For the first time in years, silence surrounded her. No maids, no champagne glasses, no high heels clicking across marble floors. Just silence and unpaid bills piling on the counter. She sat on the floor, clutching her phone, scrolling through old photos of her and Ethan. Their smiles used to be real once, before greed had whispered in her ear. She saw the dinners he cooked after late meetings, the vacations he planned just to make her smile. The guilt she'd buried beneath ambition began to claw its way back. Lydia called Ethan, desperate, humiliated, but the call didn't go through. He'd blocked her. Her attorney had told her bluntly, "The court's decision is final, Lydia. You'll need to rebuild on your own." But she had no savings, no job, and no friends who weren't there for her wealth. Everyone had quietly disappeared once the gossip spread. Meanwhile, Ethan's life was transforming in quiet, deliberate ways. He'd returned to work at the company he built from scratch, Coltech Solutions, stronger and calmer. His employees respected him more than ever, not just for his success, but for how he'd handled betrayal with dignity. He was no longer the man consumed by his wife's deception. He was focused, present, rebuilding from the heart out. Late one evening, he sat with Mark, his lawyer-turned-friend, at a quiet rooftop bar. The city lights shimmered below. You could have destroyed her completely, Mark said, sipping his drink. Press charges, expose her publicly. Why didn't you? Ethan smiled faintly. Because I didn't need to. She already destroyed herself. All I did was show her the mirror. Mark nodded slowly. And the recording, when did you start recording? Ethan leaned back, remembering the night Lydia said the words that changed everything, "I'm just here for the money." He had laughed then, not out of disbelief but because he knew what he'd do next. He quietly shifted assets, reinforced his prenup, built digital walls she couldn't see. It wasn't vengeance, it was protection. The rest had unfolded naturally. As they talked, a soft breeze blew across the rooftop. Ethan looked out over the skyline, his voice distant. She thought love was a transaction. I showed her that greed has a price. Across the city, Lydia walked alone under a flickering streetlight, her designer coat torn at the sleeve. Her heels clicked against wet pavement as rain began to fall. For a moment she looked up at the skyline, at the building where Ethan was, and whispered, "I'm sorry." But there was no one left to hear it. Months passed. Ethan's life had found rhythm again, steady, calm, purposeful. He poured his energy into rebuilding not just his company but himself. The house that once felt cold and empty now echoed with warmth again. He had redecorated, nothing fancy, just simple and meaningful. He replaced Lydia's imported art with photos of his son Adam's drawings. The walls carried laughter now, not tension. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, Ethan stood brewing coffee when Adam ran in, backpack swinging. "Dad, Miss Clara said we're going to visit the Science Museum today," the boy said excitedly. Ethan smiled. "Clara's going with you?" "Yeah. She's the best teacher ever. Clara Hughes, the new science teacher at Adam's school. She joined a few months back. Quiet, compassionate, grounded. The kind of person who didn't talk much but always listened deeply. Ethan had met her during a parent-teacher meeting and somehow the conversation had lingered in his mind ever since. Later that week he found himself at the school fundraiser. Clara was there, sleeves rolled up, helping set up tables while others gave orders. Her simplicity stood out in a crowd of pretentious chatter. When their eyes met she smiled. "Mr. Cole, right? Adam's dad." "Yes," he said, smiling back. "But you can call me Ethan." She laughed softly. "Ethan then. Your son's one of the most curious kids I've ever met. He asks questions even I can't answer. He chuckled. Sounds like me when I was his age. They talked easily, about life, books, and how little moments often matter more than big ones. She didn't ask about his wealth or his company or his past. She only asked about what made him happy. That alone disarmed him. Over time they began to meet more often, at school events, coffee shops, and once at a park where Adam played soccer. Their bond grew slowly, built on honesty and shared understanding rather than appearances. One evening, after dropping Adam at his friend's house, Ethan met Clara for dinner at a quiet bistro. The air was soft with candlelight and low jazz music. Clara noticed the subtle sadness behind his smile. You still think about her sometimes, don't you? She asked gently. He nodded, honest. Sometimes. Not because I miss her, but because she taught me what love shouldn't feel like. Clara smiled, her eyes kind. Then maybe that means you're ready to learn what love really feels like. For a long moment Ethan just looked at her. No pretense, no defense. Then he smiled, genuine and peaceful. Maybe I am. Later that night, as he drove home under the glow of streetlights, Ethan realized his revenge was never about hurting Lydia, it was about freeing himself. And now, for the first time in years, he felt truly free. At home, he found Adam asleep on the couch, clutching a half-built Lego rocket. Ethan sat beside him, brushing his hair gently. We're going to be okay, buddy, he whispered. We already are, came the sleepy reply. And for once it was true. It was a rainy Sunday morning when Ethan saw her again. He was driving back from Adam's soccer game with Clara in the passenger seat, soft music playing in the background. The city streets glistened under the drizzle, everything calm, ordinary, until he stopped at a red light and noticed a familiar figure at the corner. Lydia. She stood by a small cafe, drenched in the rain, holding a broken umbrella. Her once flawless appearance had faded, hair unkempt, eyes tired, clothes worn. She looked like a ghost from another lifetime. Clara noticed his silence. Do you know her? She asked gently. Ethan hesitated. I used to. He pulled over. Wait here. As he stepped out into the rain, Lydia saw him and froze. For a moment neither spoke. The rain fell softly between them, heavy with unspoken memories. Ethan, she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't expect to see you. He looked at her, really looked at her, and felt a strange mix of sadness and peace. You look different. She gave a bitter smile. Yeah. Life does that when you lose everything. He didn't gloat. He didn't remind her why. He simply said, You still have a chance to start over, Lydia. She laughed weakly. Start over? With what? I burned every bridge chasing money. Ryan's gone. Friends disappeared. And the only person who ever truly cared about me is standing in front of me, looking at me like a stranger. Her eyes glistened. I was stupid, Ethan. I thought wealth would fill the emptiness. I thought power meant happiness. But now I realize, you were my peace all along. Ethan's heart ached, but not with longing, with finality. I loved you once, he said softly. And even though you hurt me, I don't hate you. I just stopped needing you. She nodded slowly, tears mixing with rain. I know. I don't deserve forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't about deserving, he replied. It's about letting go. He reached into his coat pocket and handed her an envelope. Inside was a business card and a check. There's a position at one of my charity foundations. It's not much, but it's honest work. If you really want to start over, this is your chance. She stared at the card, her hands shaking. You'd still help me? After everything I did? Ethan smiled faintly. Revenge was never about watching you fall, Lydia. It was about proving I could rise without you. He turned to leave, and as he walked back to the car, Lydia watched him go, tears streaming down her face, but for the first time she wasn't crying for what she lost. She was crying for what she'd finally understood. Inside the car, Clara looked at him quietly. You did the right thing. He exhaled, watching the rain blur the city lights. Maybe. Or maybe I just needed to close the last chapter. The light turned green. He drove forward, leaving the past behind in the rearview mirror, washed away by the rain. As they disappeared into the city, Lydia whispered to herself. He laughed last, but he also forgave first. And that was his true revenge. Subscribe, like, comment and share for interesting stories.